for this type of traditional knowledge to get out, to have a voice, what do you think that first the Adivasi indigenous communities need to do? What is it that we as media people need to do? And what do you think is something that, say, the government needs to do so that this gets acknowledged?
Yeah, so first of all, what the indigenous communities needs to do is, I think here the worldview plays a very important role. Like for me, what nature means to me is, it's a source of our life and identity. And that is why our traditional knowledge and practices is not something which we have doing it for the sake of protecting, but it is a way of living which we have been living in a symbiotic relationship for over years. So I think the perspective and the worldview of the indigenous community needs to be respected first, and also it needs to be understood that the traditional knowledge and practices and perspective of indigenous communities is there in the form of oral documentation, in
Mm-hmm.
the form of dance, in the form of songs, in the form of their folklore. So that needs to be understood, and once that is understood, I feel when the media people are going in terms of documentation or writing those stories, once the worldview is understood by the people who are documenting, it becomes much more together and a collective effort. Because in terms of the documentation also, one of the problem is it should not happen that the other worldview tried to demeans the traditional knowledge and practices of the indigenous community. So it is very important that we understand and respect the worldview and do the documentation. And having said that, I feel there can be different forms of documentation as we are seeing. It can be in the form of writing, it can be in the form of video, it can be in the form of any photography journalism also, which many indigenous youth have also started taking up. Because I feel mass communication in the indigenous community were there in years, from ages, like in this form of song and collective meetings. But now our community youth have also taken up this new form of documentation in the form of camera. And the researchers of tribal researchers or the indigenous youth who are researchers are also making an effort to go back to their community, learn from them and write these documentation, who had also been distant from their communities because of this migration and displacement which has happened. And having said that, from government end, I feel it is very important to institutionalize this documentation process. And
Mm-hmm.
because I am here in Odisha, it is difficult for me to know what is happening in the different parts of the country. But government having that institution, it can ensure that a nationwide documentation campaign can initiate, so that every states whichever different practices they are having can be documented, and so that it turns out to be an evidence. When I talk about evidence, where it is also an evidence for the upcoming generation, so that they also know what traditional knowledge and practices was there, so that it can be preserved. And second of all, what I feel from the government institution is very important, that when documentations will be institutionalized or will be done, it is very important that majority is the indigenous people who are documenting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is very important, that we need to document our own stories, our own narratives, because that we know better. And that is why I started this entire discourse of doing it, because I realized that it is we who have to tell the story, not others who have to tell a story for them. And for which I specifically would like to say that the government institution can specifically do that the indigenous communities are part, both the indigenous youth and the indigenous leaders needs to be part. Because I feel at this particular time what is happening is we really need to redefine who is experts. Because our definition of experts is leading to literature and leading to policy making. Because I feel the indigenous youth, indigenous leader with whom I am interacting or with whom I have interacted, who are there, who are illiterate maybe by the parameters of the current education system, but they are the ones who have immense amount of knowledge and wisdom. And that is why I feel they need to be in the forefront when we talk about documentation and preservation.
Mm-hmm. That's so well said, Archana. Thanks for saying that. You also mentioned that you started doing some sort of a project. Is that in terms of documenting traditional knowledges?
Yeah, so
Okay.
actually, the entire, desire and the passion to engage in documentation and preservation of traditional knowledge and practices came when I lost my father in 2017. So he was a principal of Gangpur College of Social Work, but he was also an indigenous healthcare practitioner. So when I have seen him from my entire childhood, how he has been giving medicine specifically in terms of snake bite, and a lot of people getting cured. So the thing is ki this he learned from his own, uncle and grandfather of mine, and that is how the transition of knowledge is. But when I lost him, I realized, it's there's no time. We really need to go back to our elders to know this traditional knowledge and practices and document it, because if we lose them right now, we our generation has nothing to tell to the upcoming generation. And that is why I have started writing this. So there's no project as such, because not one project, but depending on the situation, like I am also writing about, how forest protection practices are being doing, and how they have alternatives to plastic pollution. So these are certain things which I have emphasized, and this is, I'm just broadening more and more to understand how different aspects can be highlighted, because what the mainstream discussion is there, and how indigenous perspective can also be highlighted in that.
Great. So good luck with that. I
Yeah.
hope a lot of documentation comes out from that, and I'd be very glad to read whatever you manage to collect in the time.
Also, I just
Mhm.
wanted to say is that apart from, professionally working with Vasundhara, we have been doing a lot of documentation on that in terms of reporting and case study and studies.
Mhm.
But on personal level, we have started Adivasidrishim. It is an initiative which we have started, which my brother Eugene Soreng curated that, and we are now a team. Mostly we are from friends from my Tata Institute of Social Sciences and my Patna Women's College, and Patna friends have been part of it. So it's an basically Adivasi Drishyam is a platform which we have created to document the traditional knowledge and practices of the indigenous community. So that is something which has been there since 2016, but now during the lockdown we have been full-fledgedly working on it, and it has done really well. So that is, if we say, yeah, that is one of the project, or that is one of the initiative which we have started collectively, indigenous youth coming together.